Yeah, so in this lecture, we are going to discuss what is an API. So basically, API stands for Application Programming Interface. So let's understand what an API is. So in a very simple terms, API allows two applications to talk to each other. There's a photo app here, and there is a third-party app here. So we need some cat photos from the photo application, which is having a repository for all the cats. So this application should know what kind of request it has to send to the photo application, what is the endpoint it has to it, and what is the response it is expecting. So API allows two applications to talk to each other with predefined rules and protocols. So what does that mean? So that means both the applications should know what kind of protocol they are going to use for communication. Here, for example, they are going to use an HTTP protocol, and going to make a get request here to the photo application, and photo application will expose an endpoint as to where the request is needs to be sent, and then it is going to send back the response in terms of cat photos. So both the applications which are communicating with each other should know what are the rules and protocols for communicating. So why do applications talk to each other? So basically, they talk to each other to share some information, or perform some operations. Okay. For example, they may want to get some weather data, or a traffic data, or a list of all the restaurants, or they may want to create a new user in the other application, or they want to delete any user in the application. So basically, applications talk to each other to share some information, or perform certain operations on it. Now, just as I discussed before, app sharing information just exposes the interface or endpoint to communicate, and it is going to define the rules to communicate with it. So here we have a photo app, so it's going to uh, give what URI you have to it, what you have to make a get request from third party application, and how the URI structure is, and what kind of response it's going to expect. So those kind of informations are already shared between them, between both the application. In the documentation of the photo application, they're going to share what is the URI, what is the endpoint, all those stuff, and what is the response we're going to expect. So basically, API is a set of rules and protocols, that allows different software applications to communicate, and interact with each other. So the API specified what kind of request to be made to fetch the data, or perform any action. Okay. So why are you making that request? So you want to get some information, or want to perform certain actions on it. Now, how to make that request? So to make the request, you should know where to make that request, which endpoint to use, and what should be the format and the structure of the request to be made. And once the request is processed, you need to know what kind of response you're expecting, the data format. Are you expecting an HTML page, or an XML page, or a JSON page? So let's take an example of a restaurant. Okay, you go to a restaurant and you order a food. Okay, so here, once the person places the request for the food to the waiter, so here the waiter acts as an interface. It doesn't communicate directly with the chef. Okay, so the waiter acts as an interface. The person is going to place a request for food. He's going to mention what are the list of items he wants, in how much quantity he wants. So waiter is going to note all those items, and it's going to communicate back to the chef here. So he's going to give that order. Once the restaurant is going to, the chef prepares the food. When he completes the order, he's going to inform again back to the waiter, and waiter is going to serve the food here. So the person doesn't directly communicate to the restaurant here. He communicates through a waiter here. So waiter acts as an interface here. Similarly, here, what kind of, if you go through this API specification here, for example, it specifies what kind of request to be made. What here, we need to order the food items and the quantity. Okay. Now, how to make that request? You make the request to the waiter. Now, which shares who shares that information with the chef. Okay, and what are the response to be expected here? So he prepared food items, which you ordered here, is what you expect here. So here, in the above example, the waiter is the interface. Similarly, for the programming, so that's where the application interface terms comes into picture. For example, let's say we have weather API. Okay, so you, from a third party application, you make a request to the weather API. Okay, so the API endpoint acts as an interface here. You make the request in the required format, and to a given endpoint in the weather application, which process the information. It is storing all the information in the database, and it is going to give the response as expected. So response may be in HTML, XML, or JSON format as mentioned in the request. Okay, so here this is a classic example wherein, where a certain third party application may be requiring information which it doesn't have. Okay, and the weather API is something wherein which can share that information, maybe for a bit for a given price. Okay, it can sell that information or expose through its endpoint. So if you consider the API as a specification here, API specifies what request to be made. What is the format of the request? Here, it is the get request. Okay. So format of the request here is a get request. So you make a request to an endpoint as discussed before. Like you because the weather API is going to expose certain APIs and it's going to mention on that API in its documentation as to how to hit that API and how to get that information. So this is a URL point and how to mention, for example, this is a query here, and for this city we want the weather information. And what do you expect? For example, we want to get the weather data in a JSON format so that you can, in the mobile applications or in the web application, you can process that JSON and display the data. Okay, so this is sample request and response here. So this is how the get request goes through. For example, you may want the weather information of London in Celsius. So this is how the response looks like. So you may use this information or process the information in your application. So to display that information. So in summary, API allows different applications to communicate with each other using predefined rules and protocol. So this is how the entire request goes through. You make a get request to the weather API, it will process the information and it's going to send back the response. So what we have learned here is API is used for two applications to communicate with each other using predefined rules and protocol.